Let's start naming ourselves, our community, and a word to each of our speakers or them collectively.
Well, first of all, my name is Rodolfo. My other alias is Rudy. My middle name is Antonio. My last name is Rivera. I am originally from San Juan, Puerto Rico, born there right at the beautiful fortress that the Spaniards built. Oh. Position right there at the gate to the fortress. I also want to acknowledge my Native American sister, because one thing that I need to say, and I've often said this everywhere I've gone, I'm from an Indian tribe myself. You see, I'm from the Taino Indians. The Taino Indians were the original people when the Pinta de Santa Maria and that whole mess, La Nina, arrived. Europeanism arrived in Puerto Rico. I'm a student of how Puerto Rico became a possession of the United States. It's really a fascinating story that never gets really spoken to. And then to address why I'm here today, it really has to do with the simple scriptural verse in Old Testament in my favorite book entitled the Book of Job. When the Almighty God encounters Satan and they have a really fabulous conversation, and the Lord asks Satan, "What are you up to, cowboy?" And he says, "Me going to and fro, walking back and forth on the earth." So I want to set a context to the field in which I work in, and not just the fleshly challenges, but really the awesome spiritual challenge, which is what this whole conversation I find is about. And then the legacy of hate, where it comes from, and how people get to that perspective emotionally, that they can hold such and harbor such hard feelings on Clinton Avenue. I've been present for 7 murders here. The last one that I saw was on March of last year, when a man was murdered and everybody took selfies, and it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen in my life. So I know that's a long intro, but this is who I am, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Denny. I'm David Abrahams. I'm the rabbi at Congregation at Chaim. I've been very honored over the years to serve with Denny on the Parent and Pastoral Association. And I'm also very honored to serve with the rabbis here as an associate member of the Board of Rabbis. And to our presenters, I guess, I don't know if it's a question or a message, but to me, it doesn't matter if it's a church in Charleston or a mosque or a synagogue. The acts of violence against faith communities has become epidemic, not just in this country, but worldwide. And so I'm very glad that we're banding together in solidarity. My question is, how do we take the message that's coming from and to the choir out to those who really need to hear it? And what do we do to be effective in stopping this kind of hate and in stopping these of violence? That's what's really troubling me and many of my congregants.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. I'm Rabbi Alan Katz, the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Sinai. I like to see our representation is very good here. And right now I'm acting as the interim executive director of the Konar Center for Tolerance and Jewish Studies at Nazareth College. 2 things. One is this past Shabbat, Saturday, we read from the Torah the story of Israel facing the sea. And the Midrash teaches that God says to Moses, you don't have a choice, you must go forward. And to me, that's an important message at this time. And the second thing I would recommend is Deborah Lipstadt, who is waiting to be confirmed, but thanks to certain people in the government not getting confirmed as the ambassador for anti-Semitism for the government, wrote a magnificent piece, opinion piece in the Times yesterday or the day before, and it is really worth hearing. It's so important that all the members of whatever minority group you belong to get together and build alliances And the point that Deborah brought out, I think, is very important, that when she walked by a certain church in the Berkshires, the doors were wide open, the people were standing on the steps chatting. And unfortunately, for the last number of years, that has not happened at synagogues. We have locked our doors, we have hired guards, and that has been some places even before Pittsburgh, but now almost every congregation in the country since Pittsburgh. Thank you all for being here.
I would like to start with excerpts from Amanda Gorman's beautiful 2022 New Year's poem. She's a 23-year-old Black girl who's been nurtured by her Catholic faith community. May this be the day we come together. Mourning, we come to mend. Withered, we come to weather. Torn, we come to tend. Battered, we come to better. We are learning that though we weren't ready for this, we've been readied by it. Steadily, we vow that no matter how we're weighed down, we must always pave a way forward. This hope is our door, our portal. What was cursed, we will cure. What was plagued, we will prove pure. Come look up with kindness yet, for even solace can be sourced from sorrow. We remember not just for the sake of yesterday, but to take on tomorrow. We heed this old spirit in a new day's lyric. In our hearts, we hear it. Come over, join this day just begun. For wherever we come together, we will forever overcome. And it is with profound respect and profound joy that I introduce to you Rabbi Peter Stein, who will start off our panel this morning on healing hate.
Thank you very much, Denny, and hello again, everyone. I'm, as I said, honored to be part of this conversation, and it's a conversation that has changed in some ways really just over the last several days. I trust that everyone knows of the event that happened on Saturday where someone took hostages in a synagogue during their Sabbath worship. In some respects, people are talking about this having a good outcome because none of the hostages were injured or killed. And that is certainly a good thing and something to be thankful for. At the same time, we recognize the severity of this and the pain that has been caused by this event. So I wanted to begin with a few words from the rabbi of that synagogue who wrote a community affirmation that he shared during a healing service that was held the day after this terrible incident. So this is from Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, what he calls a community affirmation. We stand together against hatred, bigotry, and violence. We stand together in love and support of each other. We stand together in words and deeds. We stand together understanding that our actions matter. So I share the hopeful sentiment there because for me, and I'm confident that others share the perspective, any response to hate, to an act of anti-Semitism or violence or hatred against any single group needs to be responded to together as a community, that the path to the future really comes out of the relationships that we have, not just within our community, but between our communities. And if I look at the history of anti-Semitism, it is very much a history that talks about deliberate actions that were taken to create a sense of otherness, a sense of being an outsider, a sense of marginalization. So the early history of anti-Semitism has to do with things like treating Jews or viewing Jews as Christ killers, the ghettoization that began in the 11th century, something that hits close to home during times of plague or virus or disease. Anti-Semitism often took the form of accusing the Jews of poisoning rivers or poisoning wells or other sources of water. All of that is the old history that then led to deliberate actions to treat Jewish people as outsiders. It led to things that were really non-religious criticism of the Jewish community, but rather a stance that was encouraged that the Jews somehow were standing against human progress, that the Jews didn't deserve civil rights or equality. And in more modern times, this led to the catastrophic violence, looking at things like the pogroms that took place in Europe during the 1700s and 1800s, and then, of course, the Holocaust in the 20th century. So I share all of this history because it's important for us to remember that anti-Semitism has been around in every corner of the globe, in every era of human history for thousands of years. It's not new. But at the same time, one of the things that I see in terms of anti-Semitism is that it is a ever increasing problem. We are not in any way beyond the era of anti-Semitism where we just look at things like the Holocaust. So the terrible incident in Charlottesville included very open, very direct, blatant anti-Semitism. The attack in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, one of my former synagogues, was perhaps the most obvious because of the bloodshed, but it's part of a much broader picture. And we realized that once again this past weekend with what happened in Texas. Locally, we, thank God, have not seen the bombings or shootings or killings, but there's been terrible vandalism in cemeteries and at synagogues. There's been bomb scares. There's been harassment. There's been all sorts of attacks in our local community. So we're not just talking about something that's history. We're not just talking about something that is far away. We are talking about something that is very local. And I want to touch on something that Rabbi Katz, who's been such a wise and important teacher to all of us, something that he mentioned in his introduction, is just the structural reality that in synagogues, there's a major security concern that is just part of our day-to-day operations. We have armed guards on duty. We have doors locked with all sorts of protocols. And from a religious perspective, because we are gathering as a group of not just concerned people, but a group of faith, people of faith, there are two competing values that we face. One is safety and security, keeping ourselves safe, saving lives. And that comes up against the notion of being hospitable and welcoming the stranger. How do we handle that tension when we know that we need to lock the doors and sadly need to have guards on duty, but at the same time feel at our core of who we are as a Jewish community is a place where people can find open doors and come in to be welcomed and respected and fed in body and soul. And so I share all of this really by way of saying that we're living in an incredibly challenging moment. And the way out of this moment is by sustaining relationships. One of the things that I took great heart in between Saturday and today was the messages I received from other clergy, from other religious leaders, non-Jewish, reaching out just to say they recognize the pain. They're here to be supportive in whatever way. And that's something that all of us can do, is to see ourselves in any of the hatred, see ourselves in any of the attacks. if something happens, pick up that phone and call and say, I'm here, I'm with you, what can I do to help? And that's why when we look across the 6 areas of identity that we've addressed between last time and this time, but more broadly, if something happens, take it personally, see it personally. Let me do 2 things, and then I'm happy to answer if there are questions, and then we can go to the next of the speakers. The first is an action item that Rabbi Katz mentioned with Professor Lipstadt. Deborah Lipstadt is an extraordinary author and scholar and someone who is devoted to the public good, one of the foremost experts on anti-Semitism. And she has been nominated by the president to serve in an ambassador role directly addressing anti-Semitism and hatred. And her nomination is stalled. So while obviously our 2 senators are not the roadblock, any advocacy we can offer to encourage that she be seated, that her confirmation go through, is incredibly important, because we're dealing with such structural issues that if we don't have that kind of high leadership response, then it's hard to imagine the way out of it. The other is, I'll share a resource in the chat, and that is a way to track anti-Semitism. This comes from the ADL, and I will tell you, it will not help you sleep at night, because it gives descriptions of anti-Semitic incidents, and there are a lot of them. It is a very active database that is a valuable source of education, because it reminds us that it's not just that something happened in Texas and before that it was a couple years ago and a couple years before that. No, these are things that are happening certainly on a weekly basis, if not sometimes on a daily basis. So for those who are still gaining comfort with the Zoom technology, if you click on that link, it would take you directly to that site, but you can also right-click on that link and save it so you have it for later on. You can copy it and save it wherever you'd like. So you don't have to rely just on having it here in the chat box during our meeting today. Denny, thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I will stop here and ask if there are any comments or questions, and then we'll go to the next of our important presentations.
I'm sure that there will be comments and questions, but I guess people are waiting, and will do that after they hear the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you so
Sure.
very
And I'm
much.
anxious to hear the speakers as well.
Yeah, thank you. Let's have Rodolfo, would you be so kind as to give your presentation?
Sure. First of all, greetings to all of you. I'm humbled by being in the presence of such scholarly people. I say that in the context that one of my favorite characters in scripture is a fellow by the name of Paul. And I was most impressed with him one day when he wrote a letter and he opened it with greetings from the chief sinner. And I said to myself, now that's a man that I particularly like. It strikes me that he had been through much, as I'm sure many of us know, and he was transformed and led many a people, including someone like me who is not Jewish. I'm a man of faith. I should have said earlier, I'm part of the St. Francis Cabrini parish here in the city, which is Annunciation on the north side. On Main Street is Corpus Christi. And then my church, the one I attend, guys, is St. Michael's. And I don't know if many of you have ever heard of St. Michael's, but it's really a great story of Irish and Germans who migrated to this area. Puerto Ricans didn't show up in Rochester until about the 40s. And then from there on, we're now approximately about, depending on what number you follow, about 70,000 strong. As I said earlier, I was born in Puerto Rico. And so Catholicism is, who most of us Latinos are. I might put that out there. There are many different denominations within our community, but Catholicism is probably the biggest presence of organized religion, and I would say in the Latino community worldwide, whether you go to South America, Central, wherever you go. Catholicism is in our DNA, and it's just part of who we have evolved as people. We've evolved that way. I come to this conversation really because of what I do. Though I may be the CEO of this place, and some might say the founder, I would qualify that to anyone saying that, no, I was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. And so the center found me. And I want to put that in a serious context. The center found me. Being here is really, to me, the epitome of all of what we're talking about. This notion of hate, violence, premeditated violence, all these things that come into play. Here on Clinton Avenue, if you're not familiar, it's a pretty rough section of this whole region, if you will. So we constantly see violence literally every day. And so I asked myself as I came to this conversation, and I think someone earlier said, well, I want to try to walk away with something that might be of value. And so I offer these thoughts. The first thing is, in light of where we are, in light of COVID, in light of everything, in light of all these things that are happening, one of the things that we found is that we needed to go to the people. We needed to go to the people. One of the things that I do is I work on the streets in these neighborhoods. And the reason that is important to the work that the center does and the work that I do is because I've come to the conclusion that just because St. Michael's, which is right next to me, resides there, a massive building, there's a disconnect between St. Michael's, Catholicism, and the condition of the people. Therein is, for me, the challenge for the faith community to figure out how we can creatively take ourselves out of our physical structures and go to the environment where people are found. And not so much to evangelize or to, teach religion, if you will, but to do some basic, simple things, which is what we do here. And I think it's one of the reasons that not only are we successful, but we also try to find simple solutions to complex problems. So, for example, here, how we deal with hate and the things that we do here are things like coffee, sandwiches, information, engagement, relationship. We're the only center here. So it's not hard for people to find us. They come here, they migrate here because they know that this house treats them with genuine dignity and respect, which we do. More significantly than that, what we do is we validate their humanity. I work with people on the streets, drug addicted, homeless, past criminal histories, drug dealers, you name it, mothers with children, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I find in my own equation, that of the center, is how do we get past the history of what people have experienced? Because I think when you talk about hate, there's always a beginning point at where it started, or how did you come to that perspective? And oftentimes I find it's just the brutality of life, sometimes for some people. For other people, it may not be that. But one of the things that we do know is that, as crazy as they may sound to us, love does overcome all things. And so our constant engagement with the community is less about come to church and, will you come join and worship with me? What we do is try to take the church out onto the streets. I don't preach about God, but all I got to say is when I hand them a sandwich and they say, oh, thank you so much, I just simply say, thank the Lord, he made it available, and let it keep moving. But I'm all of the belief that those words, as few as they may be in that moment, are really the kind of message that people are just striving, thriving to hear, to receive. And I think that that's where the work of the faith community comes into play. I am of the firm opinion that unless we stand up collectively in a forceful way, I think that we'll continue to see the things that are happening in the ways that they are happening. And I'm just speaking now here locally to Rochester, and I'm glad these things have not happened. And I pray to God they don't. But the environment and the atmosphere is such that if we don't prevent it, if we don't speak to it, then when it happens, we are constantly reacting to the situation. And so, no one knows what's in the minds of anyone. Any person that I see up here on the street, because I'm an advocate against some of the things that go on here, I think seriously, somebody's going to walk up here and put a bullet in me because they don't like what I'm saying. They don't like the idea that the message we deliver is about humanizing people. And so I hope wherever we go with this conversation, that at the core of this conversation remains this idea that I believe, and that is to say that we must continue to prevail. We must continue to try. We must never give up. And as a Catholic, I would say we need to put, the gospel into high gear and make it active versus passive with the idea of woe is I. And I think that right now, part of the challenge, for at least for the Catholic Church, is what exactly is your relevance? What exactly is your presence in this conversation? And I think that in part is part of the difficulty of moving this conversation in a larger way without the support of those who structurally control how religious institutions operate. So I just want to say that the solution to our problem lies with us, within us. It's just a question of its application. And so where I'm at these days is I think we need to keep applying what we know works, and we need to be creative about the things that we don't know what to do about, but we must be persistent in making sure that whatever we do, it's really about dignity, respect, and love for that human being. Because I honestly believe that when you validate people in some form, fashion, or another, you legitimize them and you legitimize yourself. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you for allowing me to share with all of you.
Your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Rodolfo. And now we would love to hear from Virginia Fifield.
Okay, I'd like to start off with, there's a misconception about Native Americans. First of all, we'd like to be called Indigenous, First Nations, or Native. We'd like to leave America out of it. Then there's the fact that there are over 500 nations in just the United States. Each is different, each is unique. So lumping us all together is like saying somebody is from Africa. Africa is a continent, not a country. This is where the Creator placed us and gave us our original instructions. We still practice the ceremonies and ways that were given to us by the Creator thousands of years ago. It isn't honoring traditions from the old country. It's a way of life that has been handed down through generations. We don't have a religion necessarily. We have a way of life that is written on our hearts. And we live it 24/7, 365 days a year. It is a way that has been in practice for over 10,000 years. Christianity is a new kid on the block comparatively. Government and history books, you were taught America means United States. Well, we don't look at it that way. America is South America, Central America, North America, and the Caribbean. And we call the Hawaiians our little cousins. All of the indigenous people of these lands are the true America. And yet we are an invisible minority. Whenever there's a discussion in America about race, there's always reference to Black and brown communities, but rarely are red people included in this conversation. When asked to name the races, people can answer white, black, yellow, red. And I have had educated, intelligent people tell me, I never thought of natives as a race. Invisibility is a form of dismissal, which is worse than hate. When polls have been taken and made including race, Native Americans are never mentioned. Just look at the statistics for COVID virus. Natives are not included. And yet we were hit extremely hard. The Navajo Nation lost almost 1/4 of its population. In our language, there is no word for hate, even though we have dealt with it for over 500 years. We have been taught what hate is by the colonizers. We know exactly how it manifests itself in from people outside of our community. Exploitation, deception, betrayal, appropriation, greed, violence, allies that come with strings, and a society that keeps us forever in the 18th century and in buckskin and feathers. We have learned that we have never been and will never be part of the fabric of the American life. And we have no place in the systems of government, education, banking, healthcare, or even the very churches that made every effort to erase 10,000 years of culture and beliefs. We are both the Indian problem and invisible at the same time. If you were interested, you would find out that Native Americans are 5 times more likely to be a victim of homicide than any other demographic, not from within our own communities, but from outsiders. Native American men are the largest demographic to be killed by police. Hundreds of indigenous women go or are murdered yearly by people from outside our community. We top the charts when it comes to poverty and substandard housing and healthcare. Many reservations have no safe drinking water, no electricity, and many homes don't have running water or indoor plumbing. We are the only population that has been forcibly driven off our ancestral lands or forcibly relocated to urban centers. We have experienced that America will, in one breath, say that they are honoring us, and in the next breath, demean us. Just look at mascots. Mm-hmm. As another example, when President Trump honored the Code Talkers at the White House, there was a picture of Andrew Jackson, the Indian killer, right behind them. He even made reference to Elizabeth Warren, calling her Pocahontas. When the Bill of Human Rights was drafted in the UN after World War II, indigenous people around the globe were never included. And remember that this was Eleanor Roosevelt, the champion of human rights, was the head of that committee. We could never take our grievances to the World Court. We only got our human rights 9 years ago. But Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand tried to veto the vote and refused to sign the document. We are the only race that is used as mascots. We are the only race that have to petition museums to repatriate our ancestors' bones and artifacts. There have been just under 8,000 unmarked graves of Native children discovered on the grounds of residential schools, mostly run by churches. These are children as young as 5 years old who were taken from their communities and buried with no identity. Where's the outrage? Where are the protests? Where are the religious groups who claim to seek justice for the marginalized? We have always stood up and marched with other groups who are seeking justice, but not one group has stood up for us. Individuals have, but not as a group. We have the highest rate of men and women who have served in the military, including the Code Talkers, who were instrumental in winning the war against Japan, and yet they were only just recently acknowledged by the government, and only a few received any medals. While they served, they were discriminated against, beaten up by their fellow soldiers because they looked too much like the enemy. The Army actually gave orders that code talkers had handlers who were with them 24 hours a day. And if it looked like a code talker might be taken as a prisoner of war, they were ordered to kill them. They claim Native ancestry. Oh, wait a minute. We have people who assume Native identity. They steal what is not rightfully theirs. They claim Native ancestry and then claim to know how we should conduct ourselves and what we should be doing within our communities. This appropriation is a way of dismissing what is sacred to us. It is a form of assuming a false identity. They disrespect the very essence of what it is to be Native. There are even whole communities who claim to be Native who have no blood ties at all. These people have actually made land claims and tried to get federal recognition, while real natives, such as the Lumbees, cannot get federal recognition. President Trump wiped out the Wampanoags with the stroke of a pen. And going back to Rudy, according to the United States, the Taínos are extinct. The question of how does our community deal with this hate and injustice, we deal with it by turning it inward. We have one of the highest rates of alcoholism and drug addiction, one of the highest rates of suicide of men between the ages of 25 and 40. The average lifespan of a Native man is 67 and woman 70. According to the American Psychiatric Association, about 60% of Natives could be classified as clinically depressed. We suffer intergenerational trauma from 500 years of oppression. We also have pity. We look at hate as a brokenness within the perpetrators. We see hate as an emptiness within the spirit, and so we forgive. We are taught that it is not for us to make judgment on how a person walks their life journey, and we are willing to help heal those who seek healing. Just as the natives did when they helped the original colonists to survive, we will try and to help society survive. When we protest only for not only for our own community, but we protest for the common good. At Standing Rock, we were not demanding the halt of the pipeline just for the Standing Rock Reservation. We were trying to halt it because we knew that if there was a leak, it would poison the waters for cities and towns all along the Missouri River, including Chicago. And we protest with prayer, song, and dance. One of the Sisters of Mercy who came to Standing Rock with a clergy group told me that she had never experienced such a sense of sacredness as she did when she entered the encampment. Even when the armed guards and tanks surrounded us, there was a sense of the holy. We don't demand our rights, but instead we seek to fulfill our responsibilities. We try to live in balance and harmony with creation and act with a good mind. We still seek only to live with a big peace.
I know I speak for all in humble support. We do all want to live with the big peace and acknowledge our part when that is not what's happening. So we're about healing hate. Please offer your observations to Virginia, to Rudy, and to Peter your questions, your concerns, your asks, please speak up. Raise your hand. What did you hear that was new, that you did not already know today, especially from Virginia?
I'm not sure how to raise my hand in Zoom, but what I heard from Virginia was something that I think many of us are kind of stifling, and that is the sheer pain of histories that we have of the acts of violence against us. The history of the Jewish people is replete with it. And certainly we can identify with the anguish that Virginia and all of the indigenous people that she mentioned would feel. So if there's anything that should evoke with us, it should start with empathy. And then it needs to continue this type of dialogue so that we respect each other on our own terms, on each other's terms, and not in a patronizing fashion that is described as tolerance. Mutual respect is a lot more important to each and every one of us than tolerance. And I think that if there's going to be a key to ending hate worldwide, it's going to be more than just love. It's going to be mutual respect. And it's going to take, I don't know how long in history for us to rebuild trust that gets destroyed by the pain of hatred. That's how I react to what Virginia had to say.
My reaction, part of it is absolute grief, most appalling solidarity. When I say most appalling is because it hurts so much, but the solidarity is a good thing. I just want to say something that just I remembered about. James Carroll told the story of Cardinal Cushing, maybe in the 1940s. His sister married to a Jewish man. Cardinal Cushing was not cardinal yet, and he loved his brother-in-law. No surprise there. When you get to know someone, you love them. And so he went to the Vatican at all of those meetings for Vatican Council II. And his love of his brother-in-law was one of the forces that created notate atate, nostra atate, which is respecting one another's religions. Who would believe you needed a worldwide conference to say the message we have just heard from Rabbi Stein, from Rudolfo, from Virginia, and last month from Reverend Wilkinson, Dr. Javed, and Reverend Shari Halliday Kwan. Love one another and demonstrate respect. Well, we've seen throughout humanity, there has been both kinds of people. People that did not need a dogma or doctrine to be told them. They simply knew you love and respect. And then there's people who, no matter how often you told them, wouldn't do, wouldn't love, wouldn't respect. We had this horrific dilemma. And I appreciated all of your words and Rodolfo saying, just don't give up. keep on showing dignity. What are the rest of you thinking and feeling as we are immersed in an honorable task, and that's healing hate? Yes.
I'd like to thank Virginia. It was a wonderful presentation of some things that I was not aware of. You have actually, in my mind, given the, what would you say, the pattern, the model for how to respond to hate as far as from within. That would probably be most healthy, to respond in a positive way, forgive, and it's just obvious in our situation here that there doesn't seem to be, well, we all must stand together. For one thing, must stand together and plan and move forward. But in the unfortunate current situation, we have people on both sides that will attack. They don't respond to violence. They will say, or let's say, nonviolent resistance. If we stand in the middle of the road, whatever, we will be arrested for breaking the law. And they will focus on the fact that we are doing something wrong. And then the other side, when one responds with love, good example, etc., that's not seen for some reason. So we do have a lot of work ahead to, in a meaningful way, make the effort known that the majority, and I do feel it's the majority,
I do too.
do not hate,
Mhm.
but it is the extremely verbal minority that use everything that presents itself as a focus to point out how each vulnerable population is wrong or harmful or whatever. Anyway, but thank you, Virginia. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Barb. Elizabeth Ewell and Barry Swan have not introduced themselves. Would you like to?
Hello, I'm Barry Swan. I'm the Madrich, or guide leader of Beth Haskalah, which is the Rochester Society for Humanistic Judaism. I'm also the president of the Interfaith Alliance of Rochester, and I'm glad to have joined you today.
Thank you. Elizabeth Elwell, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm here because I'm a member of Lake Avenue Baptist Church, and my pastor, who is Michael Ford, invited me to come because I think he could not be here today. I really resonated with the speaker, whose name I've already forgotten, who said the church needs to go out to the people rather than inviting the people to come to church. In my most recent life, I have worked with refugees and new Americans to the United States. And those of us who were doing that found exactly that we needed to go out to the people. So that's my introduction.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And it's good to have you here, and give our best to Pastor Ford.
Thank you.
Reverend Wilkinson has his hand up.
Thank you, Reverend William.
I just wanted to remind us of what so many have said, including Dr. King, that it is those who are silent that are the main supporters of the negative stuff. And so one of the things for us to urge is that voices be raised, that people stand openly, that solidarity is best when it is expressed. It is the silence that is used to assume that the majority of people are haters. So only by decreasing the silence can we truly support the movement against hatred.
Thank you. I'm recalling that,
Can I,
yes,
this is
yes,
Rick. Can I comment for a minute,
please.
before we run out of time? Yeah, folks, I'm an activist. I'm an advocate. The squeaky wheel always gets the oil. The existence of this center wasn't because somebody decided, let us do something nice. It really took coming to this street and with a megaphone, saying to people, no mas, this cannot continue. This is unacceptable. And by the way, my people, you know it is unacceptable. So let us take an inventory of ourselves. In our communities, we remain silent. I've spoken this everywhere I go, so if I make no friends, I ain't come here to make friends. I came to speak the truth, as ugly as it is, and I found out that truth is generally ugly, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen. And so as I listen to this conversation, as a man who's put 40 years of his life into his work, this is my last rodeo, and I'm not getting off this bull. And I'm going to win the prize because I'm not going to be silent, folks. The one thing that this center will not do is minimize the legacy of Father Tracy. A man, a white man who stood up for all of us. And to my sister Virginia, I wish I'd have took the time to prepare the story of Puerto Rico, because I can tell you right now, it sounded very similar to what you were describing. If none of you know where the domino sugar empire began, study the history of Puerto Rico. It began in Puerto Rico, but it stripped the land of everything so that they could prosper in America. It was manipulated by the American government. And so back to what I started saying. Those who run for office and choose to lead, we must hold them accountable. And it does not mean we do it in passive ways. It's the passivity, it's the passiveness of our approach that's got us in this mess. So back to my own church. I've said to St. Michael's, wake up, for the devil is surrounding you. And if I understand warfare, you don't just hunker down, close your doors and hide. You figure out how you're gonna fight your way out of it, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to just like get this Latin passion out of myself before we go away, because I just want to be very clear. Even in my own community, the divisiveness within the church is part of the problem and not the solution. And when their doors are not open, you're even greater problem to the people. Because you know what? There are good souls, broken as they may be, out there, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I say again, the work is not within this office I sit in. The work is on the streets when I'm out there reaching out to people, letting them know that humanity has at least some positive representation. I'm no saint, but I damn sure ain't the devil no more. And people need to know that. They need to know that the battle is real. So with that, I'll stop. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Rodolfo. You're calling us to the streets, and I'm remembering how I needed to see clergy walking shoulder by shoulder, shoulder to shoulder, after the killing of an unarmed man in Ferguson, Missouri, and walking in Charlottesville and at Standing Rock. And of course, go back to the civil rights movement and with Martin Luther King and Lewis. We've got to be in the streets more than we are seen in the recent past, shoulder to shoulder. One thing that we're doing is showing up at the corner in Webster at Barry's Pub, with Black Lives Matter signs at noon during the month of January on Saturdays, every Saturday at noon on that corner. And we've done other corners other times. And I'll ask the people who make those plans to do that in the St. Michael's area. I did that for No Mas with a woman that used to teach at the now closed school. And we were blessed for the companionship of two Puerto Rican women. One was the principal and the other the vice principal of that school. Two more gracious people we could never meet. And they invited us to the school, which was still open at that time. It was just 2 or 3 years ago. After we stood together at the No Mas, no more drugs, no more violence protest. And they gave us a tour of that wonderful, beautiful school, showing the excellence of the students there. It certainly countered our news reports of failing city schools. That was a succeeding city school. What else have you all got to say about this heavy, challenging, and righteous presentation that we've heard from more than the 3 guest speakers? From really everyone's presence here is a statement. But who would
Jenny's
like?
hand is raised.
Whose hand?
Ginny, Virginia.
Virginia. Thank you.
I would suggest that education is part of this. And I would suggest that everybody go back and study the doctrine of discovery. And please write the Vatican and say, rescind this. This is wrong. I mean, Pope Francis is aware of it. However, he's got a lot of backlash whenever he says this has been wrong. So I ask you to go back to that and to study real history, not what you learned in school, not what the white men have written in the history books. Really study. There was a Holocaust here in America. Scholars figure there were about 150 million people here in the Americas when Columbus landed. By 1878, there were 2 million. So figure it out. How many millions died?
Yeah. I have an invitation to all of you that I gave out the last time we met, and that's to join in a synod conversation on what we want to say to Pope Francis, and that would be at the top of our list. The education about the discovery, the doctrine of discovery, very important. What we don't know continues to be lived out through humanity. So please let me know if you'd like to be part of a synodal conversation. Joyce Herman has her hand up.
Thank you, everyone, for what's been said. It's very, very moving. And Denny, thank you for mentioning the Elders and Allies to Black Lives Matter rallies at noon on Saturdays. And it is in Webster for January. In February, it will be at the corner of East Avenue and Goodman. Just wanted to mention that. But what I'm struck by, Virginia, so deeply in your words about the invisibility, and that no groups have stood up for the indigenous folks. And the invisibility, as you've spoken of, there are ways we can find out, and doctrine of discovery is certainly one. And it strikes me that for all of the oppressed groups, there is an element of invisibility. For those of us who thought we knew about the extent of racism, I think the last couple of years we've learned that we white folks had no, really did not have an understanding of the depth, and so many of the books that have come out that are that give a much deeper understanding, and thank goodness for the efforts to try to remedy that in their schools, and that is a very important place and a scary place to stand up at school board meetings, to stand for getting absolute some information and not be deterred by whatever language they're using about critical race theory. It's about teaching what really happened and that we deserve to hear that. And that certainly is true about anti-Semitism as well. I must say that until I started digging recently, I had no idea the extent of anti-Semitism in this country and around the world. That is appalling. And I've been sharing that with a number of allies who have said, wow, we had no idea. And for sure, you know, certainly among the Puerto Rican and all of our folks that are being discriminated against, it is it's more than an epidemic, and it has been unleashed more so in recent years. The last thing is that your call to stand together visibly, Jenny, is very important. And I wonder if we think going forward, what are those ways that we can visibly stand together? In some ways, there's more than ever. In some ways, we're restricted. We don't have the op-eds, the numbers of letters to the editor. We don't. But there's all the social media. We're probably not going to all be out on the streets in this weather and with COVID. And you know, there's so many.
Right.
Need to be creative together about how to stand shoulder to shoulder in against all of these challenges, and to stand for love.
I'm going to try to write a guest column or a letter to the editor, whichever. Dr. Gail Harrison asked me to do that as a result of today's meeting and December's meeting on healing hate, and try to incorporate some of what has been said today and on December 15th about it, in response to great need, great need. So I'll send that out to you and see if any of you would like to co-sign that with me. And now Lori Mahoney is on, and I wonder, Lori, if you would give us an update on what ROCAC's justice systems have been doing to counter hate, or is about to do. Lori, are you on? Oh, come on, Lori, you were on. Where'd you go? Rebecca, are you too new to Third Pres to be able to speak for your folks? Because Lori and Ralph Carter from Third Pres are on the Justice Systems ROCAC's task force.
I have been to one and possibly two meetings, one for sure. And I will say that this is one of the reasons why I felt so called to this congregation, was because of their commitment to the anti-racism work, which I feel profoundly committed to. I was very grateful for all that Virginia had to say today, and was actually at the White House on Indigenous Peoples Day for the week of justice action around climate justice that was Indigenous led. So when she was talking about that, or someone was talking about the sense of the sacred in the action of protest, I very much felt a piece of that, was blessed to be in allyship there. So I'm very supportive of that, and very supportive of the work that is going on now. I also we did agree at the meeting that we had last week that we want to do and anti-racism training, likely through Crossroads, which then we could all begin sort of on the same page. I have done some work with them in the past, and they start with the doctrine of discovery. So very, very aware and in agreement that I don't know that it begins there, but it's certainly a lot of I think it may have even before that, this hatred has existed for since as long as human beings, and yet there is that hope that if there are people like us who are committed and willing to look it in the eye when we get it wrong. I mean, I think that's really important for me as a white woman, is to recognize that I'm gonna sometimes get it wrong, and to, especially this whole allyship thing, which is very new for well-meaning white folk, and so the idea that please, I am open to being told, that ain't it. You missed it, but I appreciate the intentionality, behind the missing it, and let's grow together and let's work together for equal respect of all humanity. And so I don't know if that's what you were looking for me to share, Denny, but I'm really grateful to have been here today. Really grateful to have had the opportunity to listen to those who shared. Oh, and I want to say to Rudy as well, I was also blessed to be in Puerto Rico pre-pandemic, went to work in post-Maria recovery work, and was there during the week of protests, and got to be among the 1 million people that were marching. She was just a third of the population marching on the Capitol, and went to the Taino museum, and so feel also deeply connected to the abuses that my government perpetuated, and learned a tremendous amount in that process. I was there for about 2 weeks doing a lot of this type of reconciliation work, and learned so much, like the Domino Sugar Corporation, and indeed America's intervention, which is still egregiously abusing the Puerto Rican people today in the Marshall Act and some of the other things that were and continue to affect the people of that beautiful island. So I don't want to keep going on and on and on, but I do want you to hopefully hear in my words the commitment and connection that I bring, and that I know members of my community bring as well to this work. And we long to stand in allyship in all the ways that we are able. So thanks for letting me speak for a bit.
Denny,
Thank you.
Thank you.
William, your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to speak for a moment about us as an organization, Rock Acts, that one of the important things that the caucus can do is to encourage our religious leaders to join Rock Acts, because just because we come to this forum doesn't mean that we're getting to know one another and learning how to work with one another, and to bring the local organizing work that each member congregation is doing to the leadership caucus, so that we can reflect and maybe advise ways that Rock Acts can throw its weight behind whatever struggles are going on locally. But the other thing is that when it comes down to eventually doing public actions or public campaigns, like the voting rights campaign that we can anticipate is going to be necessary, campaigns, that we are not just the few from our member organizations and congregations, but that we are organizing within our congregations so that they as a body can respond as well. I mean, the whole idea of Rock Acts really is, how do we mobilize people of faith and of various kinds of faith that all believe in the golden rule in the end, to move together, like Virginia said, educating one another, informing one another, contributing with one another, both with people and with fundraising, so that we can begin not to be the leaders, but to be a part of this movement that includes many, many kinds of organizations, to try to really protect our society, which is at risk. You know, we talk about democracy at risk. Well, what happened to indigenous peoples and what happened to Jewish peoples, this kind of authoritarianism, you know, because the racist doesn't care about race. The racist isn't prejudiced, just wants to be on top. And the way they're doing it now in our country is authoritarianism. And so Rock Acts can be a place where we not only educate about Black and white racism, but we educate about racism. And that we move from hatred is bad to how does hatred work? And how is hatred connected to our present situation in America? I mean, I think it's important that we try to get our folks who come to the caucus meetings to join, and their organizations, if they're not a member, to join and to bring in their relationships, so that, you know, we build this movement across our area.
Yeah, this is how we did win more money allocated to childcare subsidies for the working poor. Every member organization in Rock Acts had local organizing committees, which was most often their social justice committee, to work together with Rock Acts. And as a member, our organizations send a representative from our congregation to each of the task forces. We have longstanding task forces. One is on poverty, jobs, housing, another on education, another on justice systems, and each of those cover a wide gamut of experiences. We're forming new ones on climate change and what was the other one, William, the new one? Whatever. So let me know if you want
Voting
a membership
rights.
form. Voting rights, my God, so essential, so essential. Virginia has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing too, is I know people are saying, you know, we need to get out and invite the people into our churches and that kind of stuff. But when you do, how welcoming are you? I mean, I've had experiences in the Catholic Church, I'm sorry to say, were like horrible. There's one church, I don't know which parish it belongs to, but you people pronounce it Katari Tekawitha?
Yeah.
Okay. They asked me to come and speak about her and what her spirituality was. And they were doing this whole thing. I was the only one that called in to make sure that it was Catholic enough. The other thing is, that's not how you pronounce it. If you want to have your parish, her name is Gadali de Gaguida. It's not Katali Tekawitha. And I told them that, and they said, well, we'll pronounce it the way we want. Well, that's not real welcoming.
I know how to get a lesson in welcoming, and that is to go to a Black church. I remember walking into several different Black churches and feeling so welcome that I wanted to put down my roots there and learn how to be welcoming. I want to show you this flyer. It's attached to your Zoom link email from me and from Rocky. This flyer addresses Christian nationalism, the intersection of religion and politics. It's sponsored by St. Luke's Episcopal Church and Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Fairport. It's a Zoom presentation, Monday, January 24th and 31st at 7 o'clock at night. And the very Reverend William H. Peterson with Pastors Abigail Hoffman and Amy Walter Peterson will conduct that. And that is one of the sources of hate, I'm embarrassed to say, is Christian nationalism. So let's attend that Zoom, and that registration, you have to register in order to get the Zoom link. And it's on that flyer that I sent to you. There's also talking points. We're asked to do a little homework before we attend that. We've come to our closing time, and I'm breathless with expectation of what Rock Acts Religious Leaders Caucus has been developing into. We've, for the last few years, been good listeners, been respectful, been open-hearted and knowledgeable, shared a lot of wisdom, shared a lot of hopes and dreams. And I see that the solidarity is building, it's growing, but it is nowhere near enough. So reach out to your local organizations, your groups of priests, your groups of ministers, because we want to support what is being done. We want to collaborate with what is being done across the board. We share the same values for humanity, and we're a blessing to one another. Thank you for being a blessing to one another at this caucus today, and look forward to talking with you as some of us who are willing to would gather with me to tell Pope Francis about letting the world know about the doctrine of discovery and more. And keep in touch, please. You have my email address and you have my phone number. It's in that email Zoom link email. I want to hear from you what you want from us in the future. And when your congregation has something, let us know and we can support that. Thank you and God bless.